Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Really excited about today's episode. Today I'm here with Marcus Connolly. Marcus, I've been wanting to talk to him for months now. He runs the YouTube channel I hope that you are privy to, More Christ. It's a YouTube channel that explores theological and philosophical themes and questions. And so again, I'm just very excited to have him finally on today. And as Marcus and I were talking off air, I feel like not a lot of people know Marcus's background or what he does, but I was complimenting him and saying that he's such a great interviewer, and he really provides his guests with the correct menu or the correct map in order to have a very beautiful and intense conversation. So I thought, well, hey, we should get him on and get to know him a little bit more. So Marcus, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me, Joe. And I just hope I don't disappoint as an interviewee now, in contrast to an interviewer.
No, you're gonna do great. You're gonna do great. It will trust me, it will be the most views I've ever gotten. So, so Marcus, I start off every guest asking them what the gist of their intellectual or their creative project is. So, with that being said, let me bounce that off to you. So, what would you say is the gist of More Christ, or I guess just the gist of your intellectual project or creative project in general?
Thanks, Joe. So I think the gist of More Christ is to show how Christ speaks through the whole array of human enterprise. So I have an interest in astrophysics, I have an interest in cognitive science, I have an interest in the arts, and I'm interested in how Christ speaks through each of those and how his truth is total rather than this kind of common conception that we have within a kind of secular society post Enlightenment, where you have your privatized little religion and you have theology in its little box, and then you have the arts in their little box, and so on. That as soon as I became a Christian, which we can get into later, I thought, well, if Christ's who he says he is, then he should be informing every area of your life, and the channel really seeks to reflect that. If that makes sense.
No, yeah, and it does. Again, being a fan of your channel for some time now, you have a diverse, you really, well, you represent a diverse uh, disciplines, right? So yeah, you are talking to people really all over the spectrum. You're talking to artists, philosophers, theologians. Have you ever talked to anyone in astrophysics before?
Yes, actually, thank God. So Dr. Hugh Ross, he was a great interview. I've most enjoyed his books. Not that I can claim to understand it all, but from what I do understand, he's great. And I'm particularly drawn to not necessarily astrophysics per se, but Dr. Stephen Meyer and folks like that, I think do a great job. And that whole conversation, whether it is kind of Perry Marshall's book Evolution 2.0, whether it's outright intelligent design as those folks describe it, or whatever it is, as long as it's not the kind of crude philosophical naturalism. I think that has a lot of problems, and I don't know if you want to get into that,
Would you
but
ever, yeah, actually, so I'm just curious, but yeah, would you have any ever interest in interviewing someone like who works in that field or that is interested in that way of thinking or subscribes to that particular framework of reality?
yeah, I've thought about it. I would like to interrogate them, for lack of a better word. I think one book that really left a distinct impression on me was Nancy Pearcey's Finding Truth, and how she goes through some of those figures using their text directly, Pinker, Dawkins, all those folks, and shows how ultimately it's philosophically incoherent, and they have to exempt themselves from their own systems of thought as a kind of magical move in order for their intellectual and personal lives to make sense. So anyone interested in understanding that's good. That's one way to do it from a Christian perspective, anyway.
Sure.
And I know too, Spencer Clavin, who we've both spoken with, has made some fantastic critiques of philosophical naturalism, things like that, drawn on the ancients, going right through to modern figures and the best of modern science, quantum physics, and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny. So as I was telling you off there, right now I'm training to be a therapist, a clinical therapist, and it's so funny because there's this one counseling theory called reality therapy, even. And it was created by this guy, this psychologist named William Glasser. I'm not going to get into like the weeds of what he says, but really to make it to give the gist of that, he really just he always asked his patients, if what they're doing is working for them, like if it's actually working for them, if it's serving them. And sometimes I not to try to be too reductionistic about it, but sometimes I just want to ask, anyone who subscribes to this worldview, I really want to just like look at them in the eyes and say, is this really working for you? Like, are you really, is this really feeding you? Is this really serving you in a proper way? And I would say if begin to press them, well, at first they're going to say, yes, it is serving me. But I wonder if if you pick at it a little bit, what their final answer would be. Because, yeah, I mean, it again, not to make it too simple, but it's such an empty worldview. And it's it's just a devotion of self that I never, at a time in my life, that sounds attractive, right? The fact that you are the end all be all. But I think as your thought begins to expand, you realize, well, how limiting and just how vastly untrue that is. So yeah, I mean, maybe that would be, I encourage you to do it, I guess. Maybe I'll encourage myself to do it. Maybe we'll get some materialists on our respective shows at some point and have a fulfilling conversation. Because I think, with some, if you get the right, if you were to interview the right person, I think they do give you a very worthwhile and intriguing conversation. I'm not going to write it all, and I don't even think all these people are. I would definitely not say any of them are terrible people. I don't know them personally. Even my cohort of friends who I would say are materialists, not horrible people. I just misguided people, I think, at the end of the day. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's an avenue maybe that's a new avenue that we'll both explore together. Hosting some naturalists on. I'm curious well, you mentioned this a little bit ago. You said when you were talking about the More Christ project, you were saying when you became a Christian. So I want to get into that a little bit. Yeah, what was your journey with Christianity? So are you a cradle Catholic in a way where you were born Catholic? It sounds like it sounds like maybe you were, but you did explicitly say when I became Christian. So I'm curious if there was like a conversion point in your life, or how did you become enthralled in the Christian ethos?
Yeah, so I'll try and distill it as much as possible. But in short, I was a kind of cradle Catholic, as you say. I brought up nominally Christian, but then as I got into my teens, I started to drift, as many people do. I was very drawn, in part because of the strange situation in this part of Ireland, towards very left wing philosophies, hardcore kind of socialism, Marxism, even to an extent, and things like that. I was really familiar with Howard Zinn and
Oh yeah.
people like that, Naomi Klein, figures like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So that was in some ways served as my religion, but also I was reading or listening to Alan Watts and figures like that even before he became the big deal that he is now. His
Sure.
son Mark used to introduce these little videos, very low quality in terms of production and everything, not like you see now. And I think that helped me meander away from the new atheist shtick, which a lot of my friends were very uh, keen to get involved with and to draw me into. So his lectures on the history of consciousness and things like that saved me in many ways from the new atheism.
So
So
interesting.
in part because of that, I started to read a lot of Indian philosophy, Siddhartha Dharma, Buddhism, Hinduism, figures
Interesting.
like Krishnamurti and Vivekananda, you name it, the whole slew of gurus. And I was particularly drawn to this notion, more so than Buddhism, of God as Brahman and our soul is the Atman, and we're going to become one with the Brahman,
Sure.
like a drop in the ocean. And that
Yes.
kind of happy for a while, or so I thought, until I started to think about, well, what about our personal existence, our relationships with our family, our friends? Is that really just going to all be forgotten at the end of time? We're going to become this bland, as I say, a drop in the
Yeah.
ocean. Our characters are indistinct, and there's the problem that we have to overcome. That left me spiritually, emotionally unsatisfied. So actually, in part because of that, I started to look properly at the Abrahamic faiths, and not the best guide, would not recommend, but I picked up Karen Armstrong's History of God, went
Yeah.
through
Wow.
Judaism, Christianity, and very much Islam. So she got me really into Islam, Sufi Islam in particular, not the kind of radicalized,
Sure.
violent type, but it was about the mystical chanting of the 99 holy names,
Oh
and
yeah.
God is not nothing, God is not nothing, and so on,
Yep.
to get a hint of God's transcendence. So I used to pray the Islamic prayers and all that jazz. So I was saw myself even as a Muslim for a time.
Wow.
And by God's grace, then it was actually whilst I was reading a text about Islamic mysticism, Wanri Karban, and this brand of Shiite mysticism, when I came across this footnote. And the footnote actually went into the Christian theology of icons and how God could be known through his creation and things like that. And it just sort of clicked for me that that was a seminal moment then in my journey. So in part because of that, I start, and I'm sure there was other stuff. Obviously, God's providence is working through this, as well as family prayers and things like that. My mom was praying for me, family friends were praying for me, and then I started to get into orthodoxy, read some heavy Orthodox theology, Vladimir Lossky, people like that, Florovsky, and then another key moment in the journey was watching Bishop Barron's Catholicism series, and the part where he went to Caesarea Philippi and he was going through the liar, lunatic, Lord
Sure.
trilemma of Lewis. That's just hit me deeply. As I said at the beginning about the channel, the aims of the channel, seeing Christ and everything, he really convinced me that if Christ is really who he says he is, then we have to conform our whole lives to him. So since then, it's been just an ever increasing joy. Thank God, like Lewis, surprised by joy. That's all what I can say.
Wow. Amen. Wow. That's honestly, it's like when you were talking, almost everything you said was like looking in a mirror. Whether, I mean, my story, we won't get into it, but it's very so similar, even from reading like History of God. In undergrad, I was a religious studies major. That was one of my majors, and I took many classes in Buddhist thought, in Buddhist theology. I was definitely an atheist for some time, and yeah, I mean, I got into Hinduism, Buddhism. I got into Sufism myself, and it was in a very roundabout way that I entered back into my Catholic faith, because I was a cradle Catholic, born Catholic, raised Catholic, left obviously for a little bit, as most young men do, and then yeah, ended up coming back around. So that's really I resonated with me so deeply. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. What year was that in? Were you in your was that maybe your early 20s or something in that age range?
That's right. Yeah, it was 10 years ago, because I remember that I was in the Irish Naval Service for a time before that, and that was 2012. And it was after I came back from the Navy, because whilst I was there, I was still praying Islamic prayers and things like that, which was kind of interesting as the only one in my cohort of people doing the training. So thank God, as I say, he spoke to me so powerfully through that book in such a surprising way, and really took it from there. And since then, I've been blessed to what's the best way to put it? So, well, we can talk about it later. I'll go into it later in terms of marriage and things like that. It's just short blessings upon blessings upon me.
That's beautiful. And it sounds okay, from watching your. Okay. So I'm curious because from watching your videos, it seems, and from just like looking at the backdrop of the room that you're in, it seems like you're well read. One of the things I appreciate the most about your videos is I love every time a book or a subject is brought up, they'll do like the little flash of you'll be like, oh, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, or you'll do, something like that, right? You'll flash the text, and I think I love it. I think it's so awesome. I think it's great. It's actually, it really actually helps the viewer. You can jot those down, you can look that up, purchase it eventually. So I really appreciate you doing that. And sometimes the text isn't actually ever explicitly stated. Maybe, like I said, so maybe sometimes it's just they're alluding to a particular subject. And what you'll do is you'll put a text that resonates with that subject, that is helpful to understand that subject more. So it seems like you are a well-read guy. Am I correct about that? I'm curious about like what your education is. I mean, did you go to college? Do you have an undergrad degree, a master's degree, anything like that in Catholic theology, or is this just is the knowledge that you have simply just from your own motivation?
Yeah, so it is largely from my own motivation, but I did do an undergraduate degree in counseling and well, part counseling, part communication. So I was reading lots of terrible books at that time. So the signs, signifieds is really dull,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
academic text. Although some of it was okay. We were looking into the theories of Carl Rogers and figures like that, and psychology and counseling,
Sure.
and I always had
You're
that
speaking my
interest.
language right now.
Yeah, exactly. Better watch what I say.
No, no, no. Yeah. I like Rogers to a degree. I think Rogers is good, but there's some critiques on Rogers, but
No, likewise, yeah. I think the way Peterson frames him is quite helpful, but
sure.
you would need a lot more, as I think Peterson offers and then others offer, like Rollo May. I think figures like that are much better than Rogers
Oh
and
yeah.
complement the good stuff that he's doing. So I was really interested always in psychology and the life of the mind. And later I did my postgraduate studies as a primary school teacher. So I got really into education, obviously, and read widely in education, different philosophies of education. And I think that comes through in my channel, that I've moved further and further towards classical education. So a lot of my reading now is to do with classical education and things like that. So I have, and part of the classical education mindset is to be quite autodidactic, and I'm trying to explore more and more works that way. So actually, it's well timed. This interview is well timed in the sense that just today I've signed up for a course, a fellowship program with the C.S. Lewis Institute, who actually have different centres all around the United States, but they have one in Ireland too, in Belfast. And part of that program will involve going through some of these great texts. They have Bonhoeffer, Lewis himself. So I'm relishing the opportunity to read more books, because I must confess, recently I have been slacking a little bit, in part because I'm listening to more and more podcasts. Listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson's podcast, Pajot, some of the figures we know
It's a
and love.
trade-off. It's definitely a trade-off.
Yeah.
And it's I will say, talking to a fellow married man, there are so many times I'm so grateful to be married. And I don't actually wish this, but sometimes I just think, oh man, how great would it be just be a hermit and just be able to read all day? But that was not the life for me. And I'm very thankful that I get to go home to my wife and talk with her, rather than just read and listen to podcasts all day. But there is some there I do have this itch, and the itch is like I just want to read and listen to podcasts all day. But lo and behold, there are bills to pay and there are things to do, and we can't do that all the time. I remember Joseph Campbell, it was said that he read something upwards of 9 hours a day. I'm like, how the
Wow.
hell did you just, I mean, how the hell did Joseph Campbell's wife put up with him just reading 9 hours a day? Yeah, I don't know.
I'm delighted.
Yeah,
Didn't
right,
have to.
exactly. Oh, that's so funny. I again, I just there's so many things that you're saying that I am just getting so excited about because it's like I'm looking in a mirror. I was a high school teacher for 5 years. I was a high school theology teacher for 5 years. So we have that connection as well, being both former educators. Also, it's funny that you were talking about the fellowship at the C.S. Lewis Institute. Yeah, it is active in the United States, and I've actually looked into the C.S. Lewis Institute before. So it's just really cool to see someone almost on the same page, and it's just really, really exciting. And I wish you all the best with that. That sounds so fun, so great. And this would be I'm sure this was just you just applied to that, you said, so this is just like the beginning stages of this process for you.
That's right. Yeah. So I have a friend, Liam, who introduced me to the program. Liam's actually part of our estuary group, which we set up after we hosted Paul Vanderklay in Ireland. So it's a lot of this stuff is starting to come together, thank God. And he said he was going to meet the head of the CSS Institute in Ireland. Did I want to go or would I be interested in that meeting? I said, oh, definitely. It sounds fantastic. I had come across them before, but never really thought much more about it because I thought it was just an American thing. I didn't even know they had one over here. Thought it
Sure.
sounded like a great initiative. But we went and met the guy a few weeks ago, lovely gentleman named Stuart. And then we had our follow-up interviews, which went well, thank God. So now we're set to start the program in June. It runs from June to June, and it's got that kind of foundation that we're talking about. Books you write, different pieces as part of it, but there's also the focus on discipleship and fellowship, finding like-minded Christians. So it sounds like the perfect kind of next step to go beyond. Because I am probably too bookish in a way, going
Sure.
beyond just reading books. I want to incarnate the Christian life as much as possible. So
Amen. That's
it's
like
it's a
that's the
real
point.
blessing. Yeah, exactly. And actually, reading the classics has helped me to appreciate that more. And it was maybe why I thought I wasn't resonating with people to the extent that maybe I should have, because they have that conception that you're speaking not just to people's minds, you're speaking to their hearts, you're speaking to their souls. You have to you in rhetoric, whether that's the written word, whether it's rhetoric, you have to sort of hit all of those areas for people. Otherwise, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. And I'm sure you appreciate that as a psychologist too.
Most definitely. And that's some of the, it's funny because in my personal work, or like my profession currently, um, I work at a church and I work at a university. So I'm I partly do campus ministry at a public university over in where I live. So I'm working with college students. I'm working with also parishioners, and it's sometimes difficult. I understand, or I can resonate with what you're feeling, where you feel sometimes it's difficult to connect with them in more of a heartfelt way rather than just intellectual sophistication. That's difficult for me too sometimes. And yeah, that's real connection. It is, you so beautifully explained it. You have to like check all these boxes. It can't just be, you can't just connect with someone in a sophisticated intellectual way, especially when you're talking about Christianity. It just doesn't work. It works to a degree, and and sometimes it's very helpful given the person. But yeah, I mean, this is as you pointed out, right? The goal and our project as Christians is to incarnate the world and word, and to live this out, and to be members of a community, and to be brothers and sisters with one another. And so you need to be a brother and sister with someone on an intellectual level, but it needs to be much more than that. And it needs to be sometimes it needs to be all the time. It needs to be in this emotional way as well. So it's sometimes difficult to try to find that balance of how do you connect with someone both intellectually and emotionally. It's tough. It's tough. So I really hope that, this program helps you bridge that gap a little bit. I truly do.
Thanks very much, Joe. And I should say too, actually, something that has really blown me away again. It's his cup runneth over. It's such interest in Providence that Dr. Lou Marcos, one of the first people I had on my channel, and I had him on several times. One of my favorite people in the world. He's someone who meets that definition of a disciple, ticks all those boxes, as you said. He is actually doing our orientation, so he's coming to Ireland. So it's all falling into place in that respect.
That is beautiful, Providence. I was thinking about this Lent, or one thing I've been thinking about this Lent is I need to start. Well, so okay, so how about this? So sometimes my proclivity to intellectualizing everything has sometimes made it difficult for me to witness God speaking to me throughout my day, throughout different moments. Sometimes I just chalk it up as, oh, that's a coincidence. That's this, that's that. And so this notion of providence has always been very difficult for me to grasp onto because, again, it is very difficult for me to actually believe that, oh no, this is actually God speaking to me through a particular means. And so this Lent, and even a little bit before, this has actually been this journey that I've been on really since about October, November. I've really committed myself to trying to be more aware of when God is actually directly speaking to me throughout my day. And it really is, it's so beautiful when you, and again, this goes back to what we were just talking about. You can't just hyper intellectualize everything. You have to be aware of these really beautiful moments of providence. When you truly take the time to be silent and attentive to the providence of God, you do see him talk to you throughout your day in little specific ways. I mean, sometimes they can be as grand as what you said. I mean, it seems like it's God's providence. It's the work of the Holy Spirit that all these things are kind of now, it's like this spider web that's been crafting over the last few years for you. And it seems like everything is coming to a point, and that's God's providence. And I think that's really beautiful. And, yesterday I was struggling with something, and I refreshed the YouTube page and I saw the title of a video, and the channel never shows up on my YouTube feed ever. It never comes on my YouTube feed. And the title was so poignant for what I was struggling with at the time. And I was just like, oh my God, like that's providence. Like that's God talking to me. And I refreshed it, and, it disappeared and the channel disappeared. And months ago, my natural proclivity has always been, oh, that's just a coincidence. Don't really think anything too much about it. And, I've really committed myself, as like I said, this Lent to realize, no, that could be, God can be working through the YouTube algorithm, right? There is something there. There is a message there. There is words on that screen that God wanted me to see that profoundly helped me in that moment. And, I think that we need to be just more aware of this providence in our world. And even on the converse side of that, it's, people are so speculative of even the more unfortunate Luciferian aspects in our world that they're never privy to those Luciferian messages that pop up in our world, and they just like write them off as a coincidence or benign or not harmful. And I just think people in general need to be a lot more aware that truly angels and unfortunately demons are speaking to us at all times throughout our day, and we need to be a lot more attentive to how we communicate with them.
Amen to that. I think not that his work is perfect, but I've been impressed by the work of figures like Greg Boyd, who helped me appreciate that there is a spiritual war going on and why it matters and how it pertains to things even like the problem of evil. Whereas if we have this very crude modern secularist conception as life should be about my needs and desires, it's kind of expressive individualism, then whenever something bad does happen, we're so shocked by it. We're like, well, where'd that come from? It just blows your whole world apart. They don't have a map of meaning that's integrated enough and comprehensive enough in order to give them a picture, an accurate picture of the world and how things have played out throughout history, how things are playing out now across the world, in part because the media sort of doesn't tell us about the massacres of Nigerian Christians, things like that. It's very crude. Focused on the minutiae of politics and things like that, rather than this spiritual warfare that's going on all the time, and it's sounding too extravagant or conspiratorial.
No, I know, and that's the hard part about having these conversations is when you talk, when you have this conversation, it seems like it only functions in the fantastical, and you do seem like you might be wearing a tinfoil hat. And I will say that it does sometimes intersect with the conspiratorial, but then there could be some truth into that. But sometimes I think the whole, like, people who run with with like a more conspiratorial framework of the world, that's dangerous as well. It almost like further hides them. It's another veil to the real blunt truth of what's going on. And so yeah, I've definitely been, my wife and I both actually, we this has been a major subject of conversation that we have a lot, is this unfortunate Luciferian thread we see running really through our society. It's very unfortunate, but it's very difficult to find people to talk to about this, because once you enter into this conversation, well, people could think you're just batshit crazy, or even like some very like good faith, kind-hearted Christians. There's even a lot of, in my experience, there's a lot of Catholic brothers and sisters that I have conversations with that, once you enter into this part of the conversation, they go, I don't know, I'm kind of suspicious of that. And it's very unfortunate. I had this great conversation with a very popular American exorcist. His name is Vince Lampert, and that conversation was just so eye-opening for me. Just how subtle evil is in our world, and really how we see it at the forefront, unfortunately. And I don't know how it is in Ireland. I mean, I know Ireland obviously has become such an increasingly secular country, both probably Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland. But as you are well aware, I'm sure, I mean, the States, you really see, again, just these threads of evil really, really run through the culture. It's so funny. I was a couple months ago, you might be aware that Roe versus Wade was discontinued, I guess. I don't know, but it was rid of. And so now it's like on a state by state, it's a state by state decision. And there was this act that was passed in 1993, a Religious Freedoms Act. And so the Religious Freedoms Act can give you the right to do certain, rituals or obtain certain operations. And in the United States, protected under the rights of the Church of Satan, you are able still to get an abortion in any state if you are a part of the Church of Satan, because protected in that 1993 act, the Church of Satan allows their practitioners to receive an abortion. And so this is kind of like this like loophole that some can find, where if the woman does want to receive an abortion and it's a state that doesn't allow it, Well, she can join the Church of Satan and she can get that abortion, and it's protected under that 1993 Religious Freedom Act. And it's just wild. And there's going to be a number of women who decide to do this. It's just very unfortunate. Very unfortunate.
No, absolutely. And it reminds me of something. Another key figure for me in my journey as a Christian has been Yvonne Illich, and especially a series of interviews he had with David Cayley, when he talked about the corruption of Christianity, and at the heart of that is this idea of the Antichrist. And oftentimes, as you say, it's a very subtle thing. It's the corruption of the best is the worst, as he refers to it, and he draws upon Shakespeare, lilies that fester, turn foul and smell much worse than weeds, or something like that, is this great imagery. But the idea that Antichrist, or that kind of demonic force, is present in the world, it just became so real to me. And you see it everywhere. As you said, the elevation of freedom, where we're sacrificing children at the altar of choice and things like that. These things are such gifts from God. Ultimately, one of his great gifts is our freedom, and our freedom to even to choose to respond to him or not, and to love him or not. And I think part of that's actually, there's a great essay by Pavel Florensky, the great Russian polymath, where he overturns the Kantian's notions and focuses on the freedom that God's not revealing himself as a kind of mathematical formula offers us. It's this personal relationship that we can enter into and participate in, and that's the counter side, obviously. But to see this great gift of freedom perverted for sacrificing children, basically, in modern day society, and people thinking that is a virtue, and they're protecting women, and the way it's framed, the devil is a liar. For sure.
Oh, amen, truly. And it's this misguided, skewed perception of freedom that, you just touched on right there, that is truly one of the greatest misfortunes of our current state. And it's just all over the place. And, we're susceptible to it as well. Going back to the beginning of this conversation, we talked about, that naturalist, that materialist, worldview, and everything that we just discussed, right? This Luciferian thread that we see in culture, that's part of the materialist worldview, right? Is you see that, yeah, again, like you're kind of the buck stops with you, and you are the master of your own being, and there's nothing more in this world than our material or matter. And no one thinks of that as Luciferian, but it's actually very deeply Luciferian and deeply demonic when you investigate the first principles of it all. And it's so difficult being a young person, right? I mean, we're both in our 30s, and it's so difficult to be a young man in the West in their 20s, in their 30s, and not be susceptible to the materialist worldview. I mean, we all are to some degree, and I think really our goal is to I think our goal is to have conversations like this, to do things that we're doing on both of our respective channels, is by promoting, by promulgating voices that oppose this worldview, right? And no, all of our conversations are not in name talking about this Luciferian thread that runs through the culture, but every time that we make people more privy to these conversations that are centered in our connection with Christ, we battle this worldview. And I think that's the thing that we have to keep on doing, that other people who are interested in these conversations need to keep on doing. Obviously, no, I mean, we're not millions or thousands of people are not watching, our YouTube channels, but regardless, for those who are watching it, it doesn't even, for those who are watching it, or even, for the people having the actual dialogue, it empowers us. So yeah, it's just very encouraging that we just keep up what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it's most encouraging to see the impact of figures like Jonathan Pajot and Paul van der Kley, figures in our little corner of the internet, now informing how people like Jordan Peterson frame issues and now talks often about principalities and powers, and to have that little corner grow and
Yeah,
see the facts sort of resonate with different people in popular culture is an exciting time. Actually, he is getting millions of views in his YouTube videos, and God knows where the Holy Spirit will take that. I think that's been a great kind of, they talk about the butterfly effect,
sure,
the chaos theory and things like that.
sure.
That's been a little ripple that's gone out from our little corner of the internet. And how cool is that to be
Amen. It's so true though.
involved in?
That is so true. You think about, yeah, I mean, and he informs millions of people, and you think about, well, who helps inform his thought? And you said, like he's very intimately working with guys like Jonathan Pajot, and Jonathan Pajot is obviously going to be someone who is in line with a worldview that we believe is correct. So it's a very powerful and a very beautiful thing. With that being said, I'm curious about, so you've hosted people like Jonathan Pajot, you've discussed about having an event with Jonathan Pajot in person. So I'm curious, it sounds like you were trying to expand the More Christ project by making it not just, it just doesn't function in the online space. It's functioning in real life, or in person rather, it sounds like. So I don't know if you want to speak more about that, about this side project that More Christ is developing into.
Thanks very much, Joe. So, yes, I recently framed it this way with Jonathan, that like my relationship with technology to be like a supplement in food terms to the staple of real embodied interactions and things like that. So to apply that principle to the channel, have these wonderful online conversations with people around the world, and then use that as a springboard to, let's bring people together, let's see where we can go, start forming these communities, and spreading the message to say even 100 people, then they go and spread it to 100 people each, or whatever the case might be ultimately, as we're saying with Peterson there. So to be able to do that is most exciting. So I want to focus more on in-person events and bring people from different nations, different backgrounds, different denominations, whatever it might be, together, talk about ultimate questions and speaking the truth in love, basically applying these Christian principles in person. And as I said to you before we started recording too, I'm also interested in bringing people on pilgrimage tours and helping them to rediscover the holy places, something that Paul Kingsnorth talked about a lot. And I think that's great, something we're blessed with in Ireland, and we could very easily do that. We have, again, these very segmented tours. You might go to Bruna Bunny or somewhere, kind of ancient pre-Christian site. You might go to a monastery, but it's all in a very modern tourist mindset. It's just about, again, what I get out of it in a sort of more superficial way. Whereas I'd like to actually frame those tours true to the spirit of the places and allow people to develop that historical consciousness of, get into what these people were going through, what kind of continuities are there with the society in the early days of Irish history to today and so on. And God willing, we can make something of that, bring people together in that way too, and offer them some kind of meaningful experiences and things like that. Does that make sense?
Oh, makes per amen. I mean, I'm just excited listening about that. And I mean, I really am. And again, that's another great way. That's another piece in this puzzle of battling against this materialistic mindset that pervades our culture so much. I mean, you talk about the historic consciousness of it all. Really, it's to realize that we are a communion of bodies, right? And that we are connected with all, especially like in the Catholic mindset. right? This notion of the communion of saints, that we really are connected with, or we are connected to every Catholic, every Christian brother or sister who has ever walked this earth at any point in human history. And it really, it transcends history, it transcends time. It does not, if you are going to if you're going to judge that by the standards of the materialist framework, no, it doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. But again, if one of the goals is to smash this framework, what you're doing is you're showing this connectivity through these pilgrimages. And that's one of the beautiful things about the ethos of a pilgrimage, right? It's not only this beautiful type of kinetic prayer, it's also a liminal space, right? It's a liminal space between the material and between the material world and between the spiritual world, like every church really is, right? And what it sounds like you're doing is you're trying to make people privy of how, the church is this liminal space. Not only are you trying to make people privy to the reality of what the church or what the artifact is, but you're also, like I said, you're transcending the historical script, and you're making people aware that, yes, brothers and sisters who walked this path 800 years ago, in many ways are the same in this. Our souls are touching also as well. It's just a very beautiful thing that I think you're doing. So I encourage you to keep it up, and I would love, to be on one of these pilgrimages one day. It sounds like a really beautiful endeavor.
Well, that's beautifully put, and God willing, we can get together sometime, Joe. That would be amazing. And also, I think that you've helped me sort of understand it a bit better. I often go off intuition. I don't often see why I'm acting the way I'm acting, or putting things together the way I'm putting them together. So listening to you, it's really helped me in that respect. And I am interested in this kind of, there's a lot of talk in America, it seems, about deconstruction and things like that, or usually it follows a pattern where I just adapt all of the kind of modern secularist principles that have become popular in the mainstream, but yet frame it so I'm some kind of a rebel. It seems crazy to me. But I want to, in part because I was raised in that secularist mindset and made my religion in the material realm, thought the state would be our salvation and things like that. Now that I have over time saw the folly in that, I want to help people deconstruct that crude, as Lewis called chronological snobbery, as if all those plebs back in history didn't know anything, whereas we know better. I think, as we've shown, that's not necessarily the case. And to reconstruct this, even those terms aren't perfect, but to reconstruct this democracy of the dead, as Shishin talks about, and enter into that communion that you're talking about, it's exciting to me.
It's so exciting. That's one of my favorite professors in undergrad. He was really a devout Buddhist. So but he was a great mentor for a very long time. We disagree with each other. I haven't talked to him in some time now, but I haven't talked to him some time about, religious matters, but, we would obviously very much disagree with one another nowadays. But I remember he would always advocate for not just the deconstruction of a framework, but to reconstruct, right? We don't want to, deconstructing obviously is one of the first things that, you would need to be done, but there's no point in deconstructing unless you're reconstructing the appropriate or the proper worldview. And I keep on going back. I just think that it's a beautiful endeavor that with More Christ, the YouTube channel, with these conferences or these events that you're putting on, and then now with these pilgrimages that hopefully one day you get off the ground. You're really doing the mission of Christ, right? We talked about before how Catholicism, Christianity it's incarnational. So you have, in some way, you have to always bring it back to, embodiment. Christianity, you go to church with people, right? You celebrate with people. You obviously, you can do it by yourself, but it needs to properly be done in communion with other people. And you can do that online. And I think that, right, the internet has given us the possibility to do this. I mean, we would have never even done this X amount of years ago. Now, even probably 10 years ago, we would have never been able to do this. So I do think that individuals who share our schema on the world, it's beautiful to connect like this, but it becomes even more beautiful. It transcends, it goes up that hierarchy of beauty when you're able to actually have that physical contact. And so yeah, just really excited to see what you keep on doing with this, and truly am.
Thanks very much, Joe, and I appreciate you having me on your channel and going through some of this. I'm sure that we have plenty more to talk about, and God willing, we can do that either online again or in person, as you suggest. That would be amazing. And yeah, unfortunately, I have to go now because I have to do my course on tour guide. So
Sure.
the foundation has to be there for me to actually offer these things in the future. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe.
Bye now.